Hello everybody and welcome back. My name is Catherine. I'm a fine artist and teacher, and today I am mixing paint again, but slightly different today. This is actually something I've never done. I'm in the middle of planning a pretty large painting right now, and because this painting is so large, I'm going to actually pre-mix some colors and tube them. I'm going to put them in empty paint tubes so that I can be sure that I have enough of these mixtures that I know I'm going to need a lot of, and then I can hopefully keep them really nice and consistent throughout the entire painting. I think overall it's going to save me some time. It's going to save me some headache with not having to remix the same colors, quite so often or quite so much. And I think it's going to be important for this particular painting. So that's what I'm doing today. I'm going to mix a bunch of paint and tube it in these tubes. I've never done this before. It's totally an experiment. So I hope you'll stick around and watch. I hope it sounds interesting. Let's go ahead and get started. So here are the paint tubes. They are 45 milliliter tubes. So they look like that. That's what I'm filling. I think this should be, enough paint for the, we'll see. I think this should be about the right amount of paint for some of the mixtures that I need. So I certainly won't need all of these. This is there's a lot in here. There's 48. So yeah, I certainly don't need all of these tubes, but definitely I'll use a few of them in the process of making this painting. These are my color studies that I just made these in a big Fabriano sketchbook, which I put some clear gesso or matte medium on these pages to sort of protect them from the oil paint. This is all oil paint. Obviously, I did a few different versions of these color studies and a couple of monochromatic versions too, just to figure out what would be best. And then as I was painting both these studies and also my larger study that you saw me working on a few videos ago, I put out these little swatches. You can see all the way around here. And I gave them names, and the names were just, just to help me keep organized where these particular colors need to go. I also wrote down what colors I needed to mix these specific greens and browns and yellows, etc. And then I wrote down the value as well. So like G4 it sounds like a bingo game, but G4 is like this kind of main saturated green that we see in the center of the composition here. And I mixed that with Viridian, Raw Umber, Nickel, Quinacridone Gold, Cadmium Green, and the value is a 3.5. Anyway, it's like, probably sounds kind of complicated, but again, it's a big painting. It's 36 inches by 36 inches. And I usually paint pretty small, and when you're painting smaller things, you don't necessarily have to be maybe quite as meticulous, right? It's not such a big area that, something goes slightly awry. You can't just fix it relatively easily, right? But on a really big painting like this, it's such a volume of paint that you need to cover the darn thing, that you just don't have that much room for messing things up or for, flailing around trying to find the right mixture. So that's why I did it this way. And then later, I also kind of translated all of these swatches into these value scales. Well, it's not really a value scale because it doesn't really totally correspond, to the value scale that I typically use when I'm painting. I just sort of roughly arrange them by value. But these are the kind of the two main color categories that I think I'm going to have to pre-mix the most, which were these greens and these sort of purpley red browns. And then the last couple days I've been also discovering all these sort of more subtle greens. I was having an issue with some of the greens that I put onto this scale here, this first one that I initially made. I found that some of them were getting to be a little bit too saturated in the context of the painting. and that I needed some more muted, more subtle greens to also harmonize better overall with the painting. So I made a bunch of these gray greens. So I'll definitely want to tube a couple of those at least, I think. I think some of those are going to be pretty important for the painting. So anyway, I'm going to put this aside. I don't think I really need to refer to this too much. Maybe I do, but I'm going to mostly refer to my color swatches here. I have paint here already, of course. I'm definitely going to need more paint than this. This is just what happened to be left over from my palette from painting last night. But obviously that's nowhere near enough to fill a tube like this. So I also got some new palette knives to do this. I got some of these like big chunky palette knives that I thought might be better for mixing like a large quantity of paint. So let's see, I know I'm going to need this G4. So I think I might as well just start with that. I'm pretty sure I'm going to need it, so let's just go with that first. So let's see, G4. According to my notes, G4 is Viridian, and then Raw Umber. I have Raw Umber on here already out, but you know, it's not very much, so I'm just going to put out a bunch more. Nickel Quinacridone Gold and Cadmium Green. So let's give this a shot. It's interesting mixing this much paint. I am not used to this. I have to keep sort of saying to myself, you know, you're not wasting it because it's just going to go in a tube. So you know, I'm just gonna save it for later. It's not like it has to go in the bin. But yeah, I'm definitely not used to, you know, pouring out that much paint. It's kind of, it seems like a lot. It feels like a lot. Anyway. And while I'm doing this, I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about, you know, big projects like this. Maintaining energy for big projects, because like, let's be real, that is really hard. It is not easy to keep, you know, your excitement going for a big project that is going to, you know, probably be, you know, a significant time investment. It's going to maybe involve using, you know, techniques that you might not be completely comfortable with or not that familiar with. Not too different from what I'm doing right now. You know, I've never done this before. And I can't say that I have a ton of like super specific advice, frankly, to help with that. I only have my own experience and what I have found works for me, basically. I can only speak from my own, you know, perspective, really. And as a teacher, I try to you know, speak from my perspective and use that as a way to help students, you know, discover the things that work for them. Because I think ultimately, like I kind of talked about this in my last video, but ultimately it's about discovering your own process, what actually is going to be manageable, be suitable for you, how you like to work, how your brain likes to work. You know, still grounded in foundations, etc., of course, always. But also, you know, I'm listening to an inner authority of, you know, the specific things that make you you, right? How do we do that? All right, so I think that's close, but it is just a little bit dark. It's close though, so I think it also might not, somehow I think it's not enough paint, which sounds insane. Anyway, something that occurred to me as I was thinking about this the other day was that, and again, I kind of have to speak from my own experience, but I think there is an aspect of this that probably is at least somewhat universal. There's some way that this probably applies to everybody. And the idea is just simply, where do your ideas come from, right? Where does your idea for a specific process or a specific idea, from where does it arrive? Does it come from an effort of your ego, your sort of conscious thinking and conscious, conjecturing or whatever? Or does it come from a more mysterious place, some place where your ego does not necessarily have access, someplace a little bit more mysterious? In my experience, I feel like the only paintings of mine that really work out and that I kind of keep energy for have been the ones that did not just come from a sort of forceful activity of my ego consciousness, but kind of arrived from some sort of deeper place. I maybe felt more like I had to discover the painting, or I had to do a lot of exploration to uncover the thing somehow, and that it was not something that I could just, come up with an idea, right? It was something more subtle like that, almost more like finding the painting, maybe finding little pieces, little chunks of it, and somehow putting those little puzzle pieces together very slowly and very methodically. That's way too dark. So completely too dark. So I'm going to add more of that cadmium green, I think, and the rest of this quinacridone, and I guess the rest of the Viridian, because why not? Probably going to need more of that cadmium green and more of that quinacridone nickel gold. So let's do that. This quinacridone nickel gold is a new favorite color of mine. I really like it. It's good. It is good stuff. Anyway, I'll take this painting as an example, this daffodil painting, which I did not expect to be painting this at all. I went to the botanical garden and they had all these beautiful daffodils. And I wanted to make a daffodil painting because I love daffodils, and they don't last very long. It's like a very quick thing that there's daffodils, and then of course they're gone. It's like the next day there are no more. And so I knew that I wanted to paint daffodils, but and kind of take advantage of this moment that I happened to be at the botanical garden, and I got some some nice pictures of all of these daffodils. But I sort of thought that I would paint a completely different scene of them. But I had the photo reference, and so I was messing around with it. I was kind of, just playing with it. And I initially had this sort of idea of arranging the daffodils in a kind of mandala shape, because they are very mandala-like. They're obviously, if you look at the face of them, they are very, very symmetrical. They have a lot of structure, and yet they're very delicate. And so it's this sort of balance, I suppose, of this very delicate sort of nature of the daffodil, balanced with this almost like architecture that they have. And it just reminded me of a mandala. So, and I was, trying to arrange the daffodils in this way. I wasn't even necessarily trying to come up with a painting. I think I was just goofing around, just playing with the imagery, just exploring it. But I had the photo reference pulled up on my computer that I was messing with, and my partner, who was also an artist, saw it, and he was like, "Oh, that's a cool picture." And I was kind of surprised. I was like, "Oh," because I don't think I had even really thought about painting the daffodils just sort of you know, in a field like they were, but he said it and I saw the picture in a new way. And so I continued to play with it, and the mandala thing just wasn't working. But I sort of made a new discovery of how to arrange the daffodils in a way that looked very naturalistic, but it created a really, I think, interesting dynamic through the composition that was, maybe a little bit more interesting, a little bit more worth looking at compared to how they actually were arranged in reality. And this was completely not a plan at all. I was just, I had a different thought about what I wanted to paint, and I ended up just, messing around with this photo almost just out of boredom, and discovering an idea for a painting through that sort of play. So I think what I'm trying to say is it never really works for me to just say, oh, I have an idea for a painting. I want it to be X, Y, Z. I want it to have this kind of color palette. I want it to have this kind of a theme. I want, this sort of dynamic or whatever. Like that really does not work for me. I don't think that's ever worked for me. And I think it has something to do with, this is close, but it's still not quite there. I'm just going to make it a tiny bit lighter with some more of this cadmium green. Anyway, I see it as being kind of a, something about the need to discover something, to uncover a solution, or to uncover an image. And I can only find it from being maybe just slightly surprised, or going down maybe a few blind alleys, trying out a few things that end up not working, but then that leads to something else entirely. That seems to me like the only way that I can make a painting. Anyway, it's more about discovering the image, sort of finding my way to the image than anything else. Now, what does that have to do with, seeing a big project through? Well, I actually think if nothing else, it probably prevents you from being sort of bored. If the painting is really a thing that you're finding along the way, you're picking up little pieces, you're listening for signals, you're following the thread. Well, that's way more interesting, I think, than having this sort of rigid idea and then just trying to follow a series of steps or a sequence of a process or something in order to just get to the end result, right? It's something about being more focused on the steps that are required to make the discovery than just trying to get to the end, just trying to get to the results. That's more interesting, it's more engaging, maybe because it's in some ways more challenging than starting with the idea, keeping that result in mind the entire time, and then just sort of like, doing whatever you can to get to that end result without hopefully veering off the path too much. I mean, I don't know about you, but that sounds kind of boring to me, quite frankly. I used to get kind of maybe a little bit frustrated actually when I was in school, before I had really spent any time thinking about this, because I kind of felt like, oh, maybe you are supposed to visualize the image before you create it, or maybe you are supposed to have this really clear idea of what you're creating before you create it. And I never did, ever, not once. And it wasn't until a lot later, until I had, made quite a few paintings, and I realized like I still never had a real clear picture of what I was doing before I started, that it seemed to me like, oh, that's just how I work. That's just how I paint. And that seems to work for me. So I'll just go with that. I think it is, I mean, I don't want to sound really judgmental at all, because there probably are people that just have a really, clear vision of what they want to create, and they just go for it, and that works for them. To me, it just always sounds though like such a, like you're bending the creation to your own will, instead of allowing yourself to maybe be changed by the encounter, or to be, surprised by the process of making the art. And I like being surprised. I like the feeling of making discoveries, or figuring things out, or discovering solutions, or kind of finding what I want the painting to be. But all of that means you have to let go of control. You can't just, go through the whole process of making a painting with white knuckles, trying to control every single step of the way. You sort of have to be willing to just say like, how about that? Interesting. Okie doke. And then, follow that line of thinking again, follow that thread to see where it goes. That means you have to kind of admit that, like, yeah, your ego is not really the one driving the show. That your ego is not really who's in charge here. There's other stuff going on, and if you're open to it, you can make discoveries. Okay, I think I'm going to go with that. So yeah, if you're kind of chronically in a place of like, well, I want it to be like this and it's not going my way, so I'm just maybe going to give up. I think that probably happens a lot. Okay, first time filling a paint tube. I feel like I should know better how to do this. I mean, I've seen people do this, I've just never done it myself. All right, so that is my first color, pretty much in the tube, which, how full did I get this thing? Okay, I guess I have one tube done. All right, so I'm realizing this is a time investment. This is going to take me longer than I even initially thought. So let's see what else I can do. I think I'm not going to mix any more greens because I'm almost out of Viridian. So I need to get more Viridian before I can mix more greens. But I have these other purpley brown colors that I can try. So I think I'll do this B4, which is Mars Black, Titanium White, and Quinacridone Red. Mars Black, Quinacridone Red, and Titanium White. I have a lot of that, fortunately. So let's see, mixing these, I think I'm going to start with the Mars Black and Titanium White. Whoops. The Mars Black, I find, is a really, really high tinting color, at least compared to Ivory Black, which is really the only other black that I tend to use. I'm not even really sure why I opted for Mars Black in this case, but that's what we're using, so here it is. So anyway, I think the process of sort of making discoveries, sort of finding your way through the painting, figuring out the painting along the way as you go is really important to actually keeping your interest and your motivation high as you're going through the process. You know, it's just too discouraging, I think, to always have the idea that you have to have this super clear idea of what the painting is going to be. Because as soon as you encounter some kind of failure along the way in that process, it's just, you know, it's just going to be yeah, really discouraging. That obviously needs to be quite a lot lighter and a lot more red. So yeah, if you're going through the process and you're making discoveries along the way, you're sort of finding new things, you're maybe even needing to learn new skills the way I am doing right now, I think in a way, it maybe makes it easier to see the whole process through. Not easier necessarily, but in terms of just, how simple or how straightforward it is, but easier because you're more engaged and you're going to be more likely to actually finish the process, to actually get that painting done if you're really, really engaged in that process. Preparation, doing preparatory work is also very important for this. Obviously, I've already done a lot of preparatory work for this painting. And in the past, sometimes I would just not really do any preparatory work at all. I would just sort of dive into trying to make some big, cool painting and then sort of be surprised when it didn't work out, even though it should be pretty obvious that if you really have no clue what direction to go in, that probably you're going to flail around and eventually give up because it's just too hard. Okay, well, that's obviously too dark and still not red enough. It needs to be a bit more red. I think there's a certain level of just engagement that is required to make each step of the process interesting and fulfilling enough to continue on to the next step, right? That's a pretty straightforward idea. But then how do you make that process engaging? Well, I think it has to be, it has to be challenging, but if it's too challenging, then, it stops being engaging again, right? So in a way, if it's like too boring, like you're just trying to follow this really like rote procedure to just get to a end result, that's probably going to feel pretty stagnant after a certain point, and you'll no longer feel engaged, and then the process sort of falls apart and you don't get anything done. Or maybe you just tend to not do any kind of preparatory work at all. You just kind of like dive in feet first, and then that also tends to not work so great because, by the time you start to run into problems, you don't have any resources or anything to fall back on in order to resolve that problem. And then it gets to be too challenging, and then you disengage, and then the project doesn't get completed. So then I think in order to have a good balance, again, at least for me, this is what I've found for myself, have something that feels like a discovery. Don't just go in trying to bring forth some super clear vision that you already have in your mind. Let the painting tell you something for a change. I think that makes it more engaging because, each time you start working on that process, it's fun. You find new things, and that is, and that makes it exciting. That makes the process way more interesting, and maybe more likely that you'll continue with it, even when you get to a tough spot. The other thing is preparatory work. Do your preparatory work. I think part of the purpose of that preparatory work is to make it so that you have solutions, you have things to fall back on when that process becomes, maybe more challenging than what's fun, like challenging beyond just what's going to keep you engaged. And if it starts to tip over into being challenging to the point where, it's not engaging, it starts to get overwhelming, then, that's where your preparatory work will save you. I think it's possible to do too much preparatory work. That is definitely a thing where you might just sort of, beat the idea to death so much that it actually loses its interest again. I still feel like this tube is not as full as it should be for as much paint as I mixed, but whatever. We're just gonna have to go with it. Okay, something like that. And then I'm going to sort of mark the top of the cap here with the color so that I can see the color nice and clearly. And then I'm just going to label the side with a Sharpie and the little name that I've given it, which is B4. Haha. Well, I think I'll do a little bit more. I'll probably do this B2 because this also has Mars Black, Titanium White, and Quinacridone Red. This just also happens to have burnt umber in it. So I can use these same colors that I already have out. Obviously, I'll need a bit more white. And then some burnt umber. All right, let's go for it. So B2, I'm just going to grab all of that. I probably still need a pretty significant amount of white in there though to get it to be the right value. I said something about how each painting is trying to teach you something, and I think that that is like literally true, and that's another way to make the process maybe more engaging in a way, is to try to be open to that need to like kind of grow with the painting, to like surrender to what the painting kind of wants from you. Which I think can be really hard if you're trying to paint from a place of ego, right? If you're just trying to make the whole creative process just bend to your will, that's not a very vulnerable position to be in. And if, you know, if you're meant to be sort of getting something new out of that painting, if you're meant to be, you know, learning to be a little bit, you know, different at the end of that painting than you were before you started it, well, that requires that you be, you know, sort of vulnerable. So the only advice I can offer for that is to just practice that, because I know that that can be hard for a lot of us. The idea of like, oh, actually, I don't know how to do everything. And maybe I'm actually pretty unskillful in some areas. I'll tell you what, I'm feeling pretty unskillful right now. But you know, that's also a place that's scary. It's also a place of a lot of potential, right? It's a place of, you know, where you have an ability to grow. Oh, that's like perfect. Awesome. Okay, I'm done. Nice. I'm sure some of these colors are just going to be a little bit easier to do than others. And this one just seems to be maybe an easy one. I think I will be glad that I did this when, you know, when the time comes when I'm actually painting the darn thing. Right now I'm feeling like, wow, this is so tedious. All right, I'm gonna put the color on the top like that so I can see that. All right, there it is. I got the color on the top. This was B2, so let's just label him B2. There we are. Okay, well, I really only made 3 tubes of paint, so I think I had a vision of getting through like a whole bunch more than that, but it didn't happen. That's okay. I think we talked about some interesting stuff. Anyway, I have a lot more colors to get through next time. Certainly more of these greens. Not all of them, but more than just the one. For the purpley browns, I'm really glad that I at least got 2 of those. I'm not sure how many more of those I really need. Maybe just the darkest one. This has certainly been instructive. If we're talking about expanding and learning new things as part of you know, a creative process, I definitely felt that today. So anyway, thank you for sticking around with me and watching. I'll see you next time. Happy painting. Bye-bye.